Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is March 19, 2022, and it's time for a COVID update. I haven't done one of these in a while, partly because here in the US we've been in an inter-peak lull recently. The Omicron curve has finally come down, but it's time to revisit the subject because the BA.2 subvariant of Omicron is making headway and is likely going to be starting up a brand new wave in the US. I would expect in about 2 or 3 weeks. I'll explain the reasons why I say that as we go through a few articles on the subject. Basically, right now, there is a lot of BA.2 activity in Europe. Probably also it's what's causing massive spikes in Hong Kong and elsewhere in China. So these are pretty ominous signs. We also see in the wastewater monitoring situation, which is a pretty good way of monitoring COVID because it's not reliant on people going to get testing and, then all the vagaries of, your test doesn't get counted if you're vaccinated, all that stuff. No. Just if there's COVID present in your body and you expel your waste into a monitored wastewater system, then we know that it was there. And we usually can see the spikes in that, or increases or decreases in that, about a week before we can see, that reflected in the case count from the PCR tests. Because remember now, also, they're doing a lot of rapid tests. That's going to cut into the reported case count as well. So the other subject that I'm probably going to cover is that about 3 weeks ago, the end of February, the CDC did like a total overhaul of their COVID threat assessment system. It's caused a lot of outrage in the public health and medical communities, and we'll take a look at that at the end. But first I want to get to BA.2 because I think that that's kind of the most pressing thing right now. And to cover this, I'm going to start by just reading some mainstream news articles. This is actually being reported in the mainstream press, but it's not translating into policy. And actually, I want to mention up here at the top that this week, the U.S. government failed to pass $15.6 billion in pandemic spending. This would have gone towards testing, vaccine funding and reimbursement, monoclonal antibody therapy funding, a whole bunch of really vital things. They did not pass the funding for that, but they did pass basically an equal amount, $15 billion, in military aid to Ukraine. So they don't have the money to stop the pandemic, which, my New Year's Eve special on COVID, that was the 2021 year-end wrap-up, said, as Omicron was just starting its ascent, the pandemic may just be beginning. That's true. So they don't have money for that, but they have money for weapons. This is always the case. No Medicare for all, but, it would actually save money, but, can't make the transition. But there's always money for imperialism, because that's what the U.S. is all about. It is the anchor of reaction in the world. Any time that something progressive of any nature starts up in the world, the U.S. is there to step on it, and of course that applies to the home country as well. By the way, just so nobody misunderstands my comments, I'm not trying to say that the conflict in Ukraine is some kind of a positive thing. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that whenever there is a left-wing government elected anywhere in the world, going back decades, the U.S. has been there to try to step on it. The situation between Russia and Ukraine is not something of that character. Anyway, getting back to COVID. People magazine. Again, these are mainstream sources, but it's not translating into policy. But everyone is reporting on this. Experts warn of another rise in U.S. COVID cases as BA.2 variant spreads in Europe. Wastewater samples, which can predict when COVID-19 infections will increase, show that U.S. cases are rising again. This is by Julie Mazziata, March 15, 2022. Experts are warning that the U.S. will soon see another spike in COVID-19 cases as wastewater samples in parts of the country show an increase in infections and the BA.2 subvariant spreads in Europe. Cases are climbing in the UK, up 48% in the last week, and in more than half of countries in the European Union. The change appears to be due to several causes. The BA.2 subvariant of Omicron, which is even more transmissible. Side note, that's about 30 to 50% more contagious than the already highly contagious, extremely contagious Omicron. The removal of pandemic mitigation efforts like mask mandates and waning immunity from vaccination or prior infection. Side note there. So people complain, say, oh, it's not a real vaccine because the immunity wears off. Well, it's the same thing with the flu shot or anything else. It's unfortunate that the protection from the shots seems to be on the order of really good protection for about 4 to 6 months, and then you need a booster. But that's the technology that's available right now. It's also not significantly worse than the protection resulting from an actual infection. Like you get COVID, and assuming that you survive, your body produces an antibody response, your immune system learns about it, but even that fades in about 6 months. That's why we keep getting new spikes every like 5 or 6 months, because people will get infected during one of the waves and then get reinfected down the line because the virus is still kicking around. So, and then you get mutations along the way. But the point is that whether you have immunity from the vaccine or whether you have immunity from a wild infection that you caught out in the world, that's going to wear off. So, there's no such thing as just permanent protection from COVID by any route. Bottom line, what does this mean? We need to stop transmission. When I said that the virus is still kicking around, meaning it still exists in the population, is still jumping around, and you can get re-exposed. We need to stop that because at some point, COVID only multiplies because of us. Although, as we've done stories, it's now, because it's been kicking around for so long, it's moved into animal populations like deer, and that could jump back to the human population at some point. Anyway, you want to stop transmission because it's by giving it more hosts that you make more COVID. Anyway, continuing, past COVID-19 surges hit Europe first before spreading to the US about 2 weeks later, making their rise in cases a warning sign of what's to come, especially as nearly all of the US moves toward a new post-pandemic life without mask mandates or vaccine requirements, except, comment, time out, this whole post-pandemic thing, we just had by far the worst spike, Omicron, and Europe and China seem to be experiencing Omicron Part 2, BA.2 subvariant of Omicron. This is not post-pandemic. It's post-capitulation to the pandemic. It is not post-pandemic. Keep wearing your mask. Keep avoiding crowds. I mean, honestly, nothing has changed at all. Except, in the US, 1 million people have died. That's changed. Many millions more have some kind of long COVID brain damage, nerve damage, lung damage, heart damage, pancreatic damage. People are getting diabetes, especially children. On and on. People are getting severely injured and dying from this thing. It's not good. This is going to create all kinds of strains. I myself had long COVID-induced brain fog. I couldn't concentrate for about a year. It was like I would have a thought that I would start thinking about, and it was like an invisible hand reached into my mind and just pulled the thought away from me. And suddenly I was like, what was I just thinking about? This went on for a year. I really only noticed that it was over like this past December, when suddenly I was like, hey, wait, I can think clearly again. I didn't realize how bad it was. But yeah, that happened. So the brain fog, that's brain damage. That's inflammation in the brain and other things going on as a result of a COVID infection. This is a really serious thing. People have put out that some of the, quote, labor shortage, which, I mean, that's sort of a concocted story in the first place, but to the extent that there is any kind of a decrease in people's ability to be in the workforce, certainly I would think that long COVID is part of it, because it really can be debilitating. Anyway, continuing. Quote, without a doubt, opening up society and having people mingle indoors is clearly something that is a contributor, as well as overall waning immunity, which means we've really got to stay heads up and keep our eye on the pattern here, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, told CNN. Quote, so that's the reason why we're watching this very carefully, unquote. Comment there, that's Fauci. Okay, you need to move beyond keeping an eye on it and watching it carefully. We know very well what's going to happen, but They knew what was going to happen when they introduced mask or vax last May, 10 months ago. They knew what was going to happen, which is people were just going to stop wearing masks. And that's what happened. And we got Delta. And then we got Omicron. This whole idea of like COVID policy, being on like an on-demand, just-in-time basis, you can't do that. Because what did we learn from the first year of mask policy? It took like an entire year to get people to consistently wear masks without constantly complaining and staging like armed protests against it. That's not the kind of policy that you can just sort of toggle on and off on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis. You got to just set it and forget it till this thing is actually over. I mean, clearly, if I know that, they know that. Let me put it that way. But that's not what they're doing. The masking thing, I can't even... you can understand the shutdowns from like a short-term profits perspective. But masking, that doesn't really interrupt... it interrupts the restaurant economy because you have to take a mask off to eat. There's a few other things like going to the dentist, like things that involve your mouth, basically, mouth and nose, that you need to take a mask off for. Otherwise, masking, social distancing, doesn't really interrupt many businesses that much. So the push against masking, that's been baffling to me. It's hard to explain other than from like a deliberately eugenicist position of like wanting more people to get it to thin the herd or something like that. I really cannot explain, a no mask policy any other way because it just isn't that disruptive. Anyway, continuing. The U.S. is also starting to see an increase of COVID-19 in wastewater samples, a strong early predictor of when the virus is about to spike. Between February 24 and March 10, the presence of COVID-19 increased by 100% or more in 37%, more than a third, of U.S. wastewater sites, according to the Centers for Disease Control's tracking system. So comment there. You can see wastewater stats on the CDC's website. There's also a dedicated website for this, biobot, biobot.io. They don't have data for every county in the U.S. Some states actually don't have any counties on there, but there are a lot of counties. And you can see, I think like in Florida, I was looking through some of the more populated states. In Florida, Miami-Dade County, there's like a significant little hook on the end where it's clearly going up. And then, even in the counties where it's not going up yet, what do we know about the nature of this? It's contagious. So if you get a significant uptick in one county, that's going to spread to others. It's just the nature of this thing. So, continuing. With asymptomatic or untested people able to shed the virus, wastewater samples can capture a more accurate idea of how much COVID-19 is circulating in an area than testing positivity rates. The CDC's wastewater data show a rise in COVID-19 in parts of Ohio, Florida, Wisconsin, Illinois, and New York. Experts hope that while cases may rise with more Americans vaccinated or recovered from recent COVID-19 infections, new infections will be mild and will not require hospitalization, preventing hospitals from being overwhelmed and avoiding a surge in deaths. Comment, what's the key word in that paragraph? Hope. And is this a well-founded hope? No. Continuing, Andy Slavitt, a former senior advisor on COVID-19 to the White House, said in a Twitter thread that this anticipated rise in cases means that anyone who hasn't had Omicron and hasn't been boosted should do that now. And any kids who are not vaccinated should get it, quote, particularly now that schools don't require masking. And then they show that thread. It says COVID update. Based on European case increases, the U.S. could see a new rise in COVID cases over the spring. This wave is likely to look different in several ways. Anyway, that's the end of that article. So what's already happening in Europe, I think that we're going to see in other articles here. But in some cases, the Omicron curve didn't come down really as far as it did in the U.S. Like, in other words, the Omicron curve came down, but it was still higher than the pre-Omicron Delta wave. So in a way, it's like Omicron had never really gone away. And now there's a BA.2 curve going back up again on top of that. That's in England, I believe also Scotland, in the UK. Wales, I think, was the only country where it had really, really come down. And then other countries like the Netherlands, again, the curve never came down all the way. In the US, the overall curve has come down to like pre-Delta levels in most states and overall. But that's not the case everywhere. And then so BA.2 is coming in. And the thing to understand about BA.1, which was responsible for the December and January spike in Omicron, and the BA.2 is that BA.2 is not a successor variant. It's more like a cousin. It co-evolved with BA.1. So they're pretty different. And the cross immunity exists because of the commonalities between them. But it's not as much, if you're immune to one, you're going to be immune to the other. Not as much as you would hope for. Again, because this isn't a parent-child virus strain. It's more like siblings or cousins. So on to the next article. This is from HuffPost. Title is Omicron BA.2's strain rise in Europe has clues for US. The coronavirus subvariant has led to an increase in COVID-19 cases in the UK, and US experts are paying close attention. This is by Marita Vlachow, March 16, 2022. And again, paying close attention doesn't cut it. That's not enough. It needs to translate into policy, like yesterday. Okay. As European nations continue to ease pandemic restrictions, COVID-19 cases are rising again due to the spread of a new coronavirus subvariant called Omicron BA.2. That suggests that the US may soon face a surge. COVID-19 cases in the UK increased 48% the week of March 6 compared with the week before, while hospitalizations rose by 17%, according to CNN. Over the past 7 days, 492,103 people tested positive. UK government data show. Comment: that's 500,000 people in 1 week. All right? Despite the increases, preliminary research shows BA.2 does not present a higher risk of hospitalization than the original Omicron strain known as BA.1, the UK Health Security Agency said. So, comment though, again, it is 30 to 50% more contagious though, so it's likely to affect more people. Continuing. U.S. public health experts are paying close attention. Quote, if we've learned anything in this pandemic, it's that the trends in Europe precede our own. Dr. Sadia Khan, an epidemiologist at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, told NBC News. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, attributed the rise in UK cases to 3 factors: the prevalence of BA.2, the relaxation of COVID-19 safety measures, just like we're doing in the US, and waning immunity from vaccinations or past infections. So, comment, keep in mind, the UK has better vaccination rates than the US has. So we're going to see that in a more devastating way here because BA.2 is becoming more and more prevalent. That's the number of cases at a particular time. It's becoming more prevalent. Is there relaxation of COVID-19 safety measures? Yes, there absolutely is. And is there waning immunity from vaccinations and past infections? Yeah. So can we expect that in the US, the same kind of outcome? Absolutely. Are they doing anything about it? Not so far. The UK has removed almost all public health precautions for limiting the spread of the virus. An exception is Scotland, where mask rules in stores and public transport will stay in place until April because of the surge in cases. Comment, because I guess in April, things will be fine again. What are they doing if not trying to kill people? That's my question. I would really like an answer to that. Britain's Heathrow Airport announced that it would remove mask mandates for passengers starting today. So what's their response to a surge in cases? You don't even have to wear a mask. How is that helping anyone? Quote, while we still recommend wearing them, we can be confident that the investments we've made in COVID secure measures, some of which aren't always visible, combined with the fantastic protection provided by the vaccine, will continue to keep people safe while traveling. Yeah, well, it isn't. That was, by the way, a quote from Heathrow's Chief Operating Officer, Emma Gilthorpe. So yeah, but it isn't. It isn't going to do that. It isn't. And how many cases is too many cases? I would say that the number of cases so far, the fact that we're entering year 2 with kicking it off with Omicron, which was like 3-4 times worse than any previous strain. Tell me how this is an improvement and not, just the prolonging of a traumatic event for the entire world. Continuing, still, the so-called stealth Omicron now dominates cases in England, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. By the way, commenting, why is it called stealth Omicron? It's because it's harder to detect BA.2, not as COVID, but as BA.2 specifically. There's a step in the gene testing. Basically, you need an extra step to determine if it's BA.2. That is not always done in the standard detection process. So in fact, the prevalence of BA.2 could be higher. It could have a higher market share of the overall COVID prevalence than is being reported, especially in the US, where it's still around 20 or 30%. In a lot of areas, that could actually be higher. And in fact, the CDC has been adjusting their numbers. I had predicted a more rapid rise because based on CDC numbers, at the lower levels, it was tripling from week to week. It was like 0.4%, then 1.2%, then 3.6%. It was tripling. But then they went back and they were like revising those numbers, so the pattern became a bit less clear. Anyway, continuing. According to the Office of National Statistics in the UK, the BA.2 variant accounted for more than half of the cases sequenced during the week ending February 27. COVID-19 cases linked to the BA.2 variant increased across the UK in the week ending March 5. Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands also have seen jumps, according to data published by Johns Hopkins University. In the US, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say that the new subvariant accounts for nearly a quarter of new cases, according to CBS. CDC wastewater surveillance data showed increased COVID-19 levels from March 1 to March 10, according to Bloomberg, although the agency's COVID-19 data tracker shows that cases, hospitalizations, and deaths continue their downward trend. Yeah, but remember, cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, in that order, are increasingly lagging indicators. They follow behind what's actually happening biologically in people's bodies because you get COVID, all right? And then where is that going to show up first? What's the least lagging indicator? Well, you excrete various substances multiple times a day. So it's going to show up in the wastewater first. Then a case, because it's going to take a few days to feel any symptoms and then to schedule a case. So maybe you find out 4 or 5 days later. So cases are a lagging indicator. Then you got to wait for the case to run, like for the thing to actually be detected after you've had your swab. Okay. So then hospitalizations, because it takes 2 weeks or so usually for the case to get in that acute phase severe enough to require that level of care. So let's say we have, virtually immediate indication in the wastewater, then in the cases like a week delay, then in hospitalizations maybe 2 weeks delay, and then deaths maybe 3 weeks because, again, it takes longer for the disease to progress to that level. So understand, when you're using lagging indicators, you're really behind the current situation. Quote, these bumps may simply reflect a minor increase from very low levels to greater but still low levels, Amy Kirby, head of the CDC's wastewater monitoring program, told NBC News in a statement. Again, so there's that thing again, hope. I saw a tweet from somebody on medical Twitter that was like, what they're seeing now, like people who spend all their time in medical Twitter, there were a lot of people who were doing the like Biden hopium game of like, COVID may actually be over, here's why. And then recently they've switched back from that, and their hypothesis on why the switch is because there were some open positions in the Biden administration that they were angling towards getting by playing the pandemic may be over game. And they didn't get the job. So now they're going back to not lying. I think that that's plausible. All right, continuing. Kirby cautioned that some parts of the country could see a further rise in cases due to the relaxation of COVID-19 measures. Yeah, which are across the board, and so eventually that will include the entire country. Again, the logic here, like the way the virus works, entirely predictable. I mean, maybe you can't detect the minutia, because every variant's a little different and whatever, but like overall, this is very simple, predictable stuff. Okay. Dr. Deborah Dowell, Chief Medical Officer of the CDC's COVID-19 response, said BA.2 so far doesn't appear to be driving a big increase in U.S. states. That's like commenting if, let's say an exterior corner of your house catches fire and you're watching it burn and you're like, so far, it hasn't resulted in a structural collapse of the building. Yeah, but in that case, you would go put the fire out, not keep eating dinner and hope that it goes out on its own. That's what's happening here. They're like, oh, look, a fire. Guess we'll just let it spread. That's not what you do. That's not appropriate. Quote, although BA.2 does seem to be growing as a proportion of sublineages in the U.S., it's not nearly as quickly as we've seen in some other countries, Dowell told a webinar hosted by the Infectious Diseases Society of America over the weekend, according to CBS News. Quote, the doubling time in the U.S. actually seems to be slowing down. So that is, if that was ever the case, I don't know when exactly she was saying that, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, as we're going to be covering. Plus, it's up to 25 to 30% now. Where does that become a problem? According to one article that we will read in this video update, about 50%. It's when BA.2 becomes half of the overall COVID cases. That's where it starts really wreaking havoc. So again, it's like watching a quarter of your house burn down and be like, well, the roof hasn't fallen in yet. I guess we're okay. No, because time moves forward, fire spreads, this virus spreads, and these policies, I just have to, not to get hugely sidetracked, the Biden presidency, this is at least 20 times worse than I was expecting. I was not expecting good things. This is far in excess, though. This is a horrendous response. And for me, it started with mask or vax, and it has just gone downhill from there. It's been characterized by wishful thinking and unfounded hope, and it's resulting in people getting killed and injured in mass numbers. So that's what we're seeing, and they seem determined to just extinguish any COVID mitigation efforts. That's what we've seen with the not funding continuing COVID mitigation efforts, down to the vaccines, which is like the one thing that they were doing is like, well, if the vaccine doesn't help you, you're on your own. Well, they seem to be like pulling funding even for that, which we're going to see how that plays out in the next 6 months. I don't expect good things. Just a reminder, you don't pull the Democrats left, they pull you right. There's only one thing you can do. They are opposition, you fight them. You don't join them, you fight them. Continuing. The latest stage of the pandemic is highlighting the difference between countries' COVID strategies. China is still pursuing a zero-tolerance approach, locking down cities as it battles its biggest outbreak since early 2020. So comment there. We'll get into that a little bit later in this video. But China is, which has managed the pandemic supremely well in comparison to pretty much every other country. It has been leading the charge on good COVID responses because zero COVID is about all you can tolerate. If you allow more than that, it quickly gets out of hand. China learned a lot of lessons back in 2003, 2004, dealing with SARS-1. You can just stop transmission. That's it. If you allow transmission, the virus gets away from you. It's pretty much that simple. So this whole let it rip approach, that is how you make sure that COVID stays around forever, basically. Continuing. European nations and the US never set a goal of zero COVID, instead relying on vaccines and public health guidance. By the way, the and public health guidance, there's a reason that that statement is so vague, because a lot of these other measures, I saw in my area, they were still saying cloth masks during Omicron. We have a lot more data on masks now, and that was coming out of the public health department. No, not cloth masks. Are you fucking serious? But the Biden administration was refusing to do an N95 thing. They're like, well, we can't make enough. Well, you fucking could if you tried. So, I don't know. And then here dynamics within the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders was trying to get an N95 mandate going in December, like highlighting the superior protection of an N95 or KN95 mask. That, was alive. He floated that, put out some infographics for about a week. Never heard anything else from it again. This is we're holding Biden accountable. We're pulling him left. No, you're not. It's complete capitulation. Biden's COVID response is headed by a guy named Jeff Zients. We did a video on this, Zients, Jeff Zients. He comes from Bain Capital. The place that Mitt Romney came from, that Obama basically ran against in the 2012 presidential campaign. Yeah, that's who's heading Biden's COVID response. So that's why that's one reason at least we're getting such terrible. That guy has no background in public health. He has a background in being a corporate raider. He's Gordon Gekko. Do you want Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, the movie, running your pandemic response? No, because they have no interest in disease control. They have interest in, quote, economic freedom, corporate profit. That's it. Dismantling people's lives and selling them off for parts. That's basically the idea. Congress last week passed a $1.5 trillion spending bill that did not grant the administration's request for additional pandemic funding. In response, the White House told reporters Tuesday that the omission of this funding would leave the nation in a tough spot and would not allow the administration to offer booster shots for free to the entire population if that becomes recommended. Yeah, of course it's recommended. Like, other countries are moving to not just having boosters every 6 months, but every 4 to have, because the protection after 4 months, it's still there, but you're down to like 30-40%. So it's significantly wanes at that point. So you do need booster shots. Really, we need to stop transmission so that we don't just need a booster shot every 4 months for the rest of time. You need to actually end the pandemic, and you're not going to do that with booster shots. You are going to stop the severity of disease with booster shots, so they are a good thing. Get the booster. But you need to stop transmission. That's like the root thing here. That's how you stop making more virus, stop transmission, stop, deprive it of hosts. So Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla told CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday that a 4th shot would be necessary to prevent further infection. Except it's not to prevent further infection. Okay, masking, distancing, shutdowns, things like that, that prevents infection, what I'm calling transmission. The virus entering your body, entering your cells, infecting you, multiplying, etc. That's infection. Okay, the vaccine has nothing to do with that. The vaccine has more to do with ending the infection a bit more quickly, preventing the severity of symptoms and things like that. You want it. You want to reduce the severity and duration, absolutely. But transmission control is the root issue. But anyway, so they're now talking about in the US of not offering booster shots for free. Well, they're basically setting us up to have more COVID waves. And then they're going to pull the one leg of their COVID strategy, which is the vaccines. I mean, they'll be there if you can afford them, I guess. But, as far as this whole thing of like, oh, the the White House wants the funding, but Congress won't do it. I mean, is this just sort of carefully coordinated, you be the villain one day, I'll be the villain the other day, that will keep people distracted. I mean, there's just 2 parties in the country. So it's not like the White House is like some third party and then Congress is controlled by other people and they're truly at odds with each other. No. I mean, it looks more like a rotating villain situation to me. At best, you can say that this is a consequence of just devaluing proper COVID response over time, cutting it as low as you can possibly manage. And then at some point, somebody just goes the next step of like, just fuck it entirely. And that seems to be what we're approaching at this point. Yet, literally, the last wave of the pandemic was by far the worst out of anything we've seen. Lowering the mitigation measures makes less sense now than it has ever made at any point during this entire pandemic. I can't stress this enough. Anyway, that's the end of that article. Now on to one from CNN Health. What rising COVID-19 infections in the UK and Europe could mean for the US. by Brenda Goodman and Deirdre McPhillips. This is from March 15. So, 2 weeks after the UK dropped its last remaining COVID-19 mitigation measure, a requirement that people who test positive for the virus isolate for 5 days, the country is seeing cases and hospitalizations climb once again. COVID-19 cases were up 48% in the UK last week compared with the week before. Hospitalizations went up 17% over the same period. So, just pausing there, that the requirement for people who test positive for the virus isolate for 5 days. Previously in the UK, they had to isolate for 10 days and then show 2 negative tests to end isolation. They've even they cut it down to 5, just like the US did. This caused a big uproar recently, a few months ago. And then the UK followed suit. And guess what? Cases and hospitalizations start to skyrocket. That's not surprising at all. At all. All right? So they had 500,000 cases in a week. Yeah, that's entirely predictable. And as far as the hospitalizations going up, even if you get to the point where you're hospitalized for COVID, we covered this in an earlier video in the COVID-19 playlist, a few months ago. Probably like 3 updates back, something like that. If you get to the point where your COVID is severe enough that you end up in the hospital, you are much likelier to have pretty severe organ damage. Like, okay, you survived, but by the time you get out of the hospital, your odds of walking out of there with kidney damage and lung damage, heart damage, liver damage, brain damage, it's significant. So when you read hospitalizations, read severe mid to long-term complications from severe COVID illness. It's not like, oh, I got out of the hospital, feel great, breathe that fresh air. No, you get out of the hospital and you're fucked up. Like, you're in bad shape. All right. The country's daily case rate, about 55,000 a day, is still less than a third of the Omicron peak, but cases are rising as fast as they were falling just 2 weeks earlier, when the country removed pandemic-related restrictions. Wow. It's almost like cause and effect. When you have the restrictions, the cases go down, and that is, of course, tied to, people just got it, so they still are at the peak of their natural resistance. You get the vaccine resistance as a baseline, and then if you catch COVID, don't ever catch it on purpose, but if you catch COVID on top of the vaccine, you have even better immunity because your body gets to handle the virus itself. Look at other spike proteins that are not demonstrated or evident in the vaccine. It's able to make, even better antibodies. So yeah, the curve comes down and mitigation measures just help it to come down. And then you remove it and then the cases are going back up as quickly as they were coming down. Just like take all that progress, throw it right down the drain. That's what it is. Daily cases are also rising in more than half of the countries in the EU. They've jumped 48% in the Netherlands, same as the UK. 20% in Germany over the past week, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. But daily cases in Germany had yet to drop below pre-Omicron levels. So it's like Omicron never really went away. And the Netherlands hadn't seen cases fall as much as they did in the UK. So I just want to add here, we're talking a lot about Europe and the US. These are heavily monitored places. I've mentioned China also, but it's going on everywhere. Like, COVID is not, specific to these. I just want to mention people across the entire world are suffering from this, and it truly is a global pandemic. So let's not forget about the ways that, letting it rip in a country like the US serves as kind of a petri dish for multiplying the virus and then retransmitting it to a lot of other countries which are actually trying to protect their people. And it just makes it that much more difficult. So anyway, the situation in Europe has the attention of public health officials for 2 reasons. So again, we're watching, we got eyes on it, attention. Are you going to change anything? Are you getting any policy into place to actually do anything? That's the question. Not are you watching it. It's like that old joke, hey, watch my shit for a minute. Okay. You come back, your shit's gone. Hey, where's my shit? I told you to watch it. Oh, yeah, some guy came and took it. I watched the whole thing. That's what's going on. First, the UK offers a preview of what may play out in the United States. And second, something unusual seems to be happening. In previous waves, increases in COVID hospitalizations lagged behind jumps in cases by about 10 days to 2 weeks. Now in the UK, cases and hospitalizations seem to be rising in tandem, something that has experts stumped. Well, could be that it actually is more severe. Like, that was one of the strange things about Omicron, was that I think in the case of BA.1, there was actually a longer lag between contracting it and ending up in the hospital or dying. So the lag was longer in that case. Could be with BA.2 that it's just shorter and it's not something to mess around with. Quote, so we're obviously keenly interested in what's going on with that. Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of blah, 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 told CNN. Fauci said he's spoken with his UK counterparts and they have pegged the rise to a combination of 3 factors. In order of contribution, Fauci said, these are the BA.2 variant, which is more transmissible than the original Omicron. 2, the opening of society with more people mingling more indoors without masks. And 3, waning immunity from vaccination or prior infection. Comment, is any of those new information? Absolutely not. So, as far as the BA.2 variant being more transmissible, how would we have prevented that? By preventing transmission, because that's how you get mutations. Mutations occur during replication. Where does replication occur? During infection, when it's spreading in somebody's body and multiplying. So by letting the pandemic drag on, particularly in unvaccinated people whose bodies not having an immune system that's primed to deal with a COVID infection, doesn't already have the antibodies laying around in wait from the vaccine in case you get a live infection. Well, the unvaccinated people, it takes longer for their body to decrease that viral load. So you get more mutation in unvaccinated people. So, yeah, how do you prevent the BA.2 variant from existing? And any future variants which do not yet exist? You prevent them from coming into existence by preventing mutation. You prevent mutation by preventing transmission. It's that simple. 2, the opening of society with people mingling more indoors without masks. This is a policy issue. Why did you lift the mask? Why did you do mask or vax? So that was entirely avoidable also. 3, waning immunity from vaccination or prior infection. How do you change that? You can't really change waning immunity from prior infection. That is your natural body's response to the natural virus, and it is what it is. You can possibly, do things to keep your immune system in the best shape, but even the most finely tuned immune systems, are still gonna be susceptible to certain severe viruses. So, there's a limit, okay? And then waning immunity from vaccination, what can you do there? You can improve the vaccines. I mean, we have the vaccines that we have now. I don't have a vaccine shop in my backyard. So we kind of have to rely on what we can get. And I think that even the best vaccines out there, even some of the ones that are more up and coming, like there's a guy, Dr. Peter Hotez down in Texas, who has been developing like a different type of vaccine. All of them, the ones from Cuba, the ones from China, whatever, they all have the waning immunity issue. There's also U.S. Army Hospital, Walter Reed Hospital. They are working on what might be the best vaccine yet. It's basically, it's a 20-sided little, micro substance that basically looks like a soccer ball, or for anybody who's like ever played D&D, it basically is a D20. It's like a 20-sided microscopic object. And on each of the 20 sides, they put a different variant of the spike protein. So basically with that vaccine, you'd be able to prime the body not just against 1 or 2 of the spike proteins, but against 20 different possible antigens. That would be great coverage. It's not going to be ready for a while. And even when it is, it may still have the waning immunity problem. So these are just natural limits to what we can do with medical technology. But again, what we can do in the social domain of changing behavior to stop or greatly limit viral spread, that gives you at a minimum a lot more time to deal with this whole thing. And yes, there are also questions beyond this, like the medical system, for example, getting a Medicare for all system, changing the for-profit hospital system so that they're not constantly cutting down on beds to increase profitability, things like that. These are other things kind of in the more macro sphere that, again, nobody seems willing to touch. But even the things that they were doing, a year ago, they're just cutting back on all these policies to mitigate. And, so what we wind up with is a shrinking system of protection and really disastrous results. Continuing the article, in a technical briefing Friday, the UK Health Security Agency said that BA.2 had an 80% higher relative growth rate than the original Omicron strain, though it doesn't seem more likely to lead to hospitalization. So, commenting there, that is probably some of what explains the shorter lag. Once it gets into your body, although it's only 30 to 50% more transmissible and it may not have more severe outcomes, it's able to accomplish its pathogenesis, its creation of disease, in a much shorter span of time. So the severity goes up real quick after you catch it compared to the other strains, which would take, a week or something. This can do it in, 80% more quickly. Given that BA.2 doesn't seem to be causing more severe disease, at least not in the highly vaccinated British population, it's not clear why hospitalizations are ticking up. Well, Quote, the issue with hospitalization is a little bit more puzzling because although the hospitalizations are going up, it's very clear that their use of ICU beds has not increased. So are the numbers of hospitalizations a real reflection of COVID cases, or is there a difficulty deciphering between people coming into the hospital with COVID? This is fucking Fauci, and he's doing the with COVID versus because of COVID thing. I just can't even. As far as it being puzzling, no. These aren't puzzles. They're questions with real answers, which are solvable with just answering one or two very simple data points. It's very easy to put together information that can answer these questions. And pretending that it's somehow like, wow, what a puzzle. No. This is just misleading people. The US, like the UK, has lifted most mitigation measures as COVID-19 infections have fallen. 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention changed how it measures COVID-19 impact in communities. That's what I was mentioning earlier. The new metric, which relies on hospitalizations and hospital capacity in addition to cases, did away with masking recommendations for most parts of the country. States and schools have followed suit, lifting indoor masking requirements. And might I say, this is a travesty. And it also is like self-contradictory. So we'll be showing an example of a tweet later from somebody who got an alert from their county showing severe risk, you must mask, and the CDC is showing the exact opposite. So it's just kind of chaotic. Quote, without a doubt, opening up society and having people mingle indoors is clearly something that is a contributor, as well as overall waning immunity, which means we've really got to stay heads up and keep our eye on the pattern here. No, it means you need to change your policy, Fauci said. So that's the reason why we're watching this very carefully. Again, stop watching, get off your ass and do something. But somebody's telling them not to. The people at Bain Capital, etc., are telling them not to. Michael Osterholm, who directs the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, told CNN, quote, it's like a weather alert. Right now the skies are sunny and bright. We hope that they stay that way. Except, do the skies ever just stay sunny and bright because you hope them to do so? No. If you know anything about weather, it fucking changes. But we could have some bad weather by evening, and we just don't know, unquote. Actually, you fucking do know. You do know. What will BA.2 do in the US? BA.2 has been growing steadily in the US. Last week, the CDC estimated that it was causing about 12% of new COVID-19 cases here. Meanwhile, BA.2 now accounts for more than 50% of cases in the UK and several other European countries. Quote, "The tipping point seems to be right around 50%, said Kerry Althoff, an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Quote, "That's when we really start to see that variant flex its power in the population," unquote, as far as showing its severity. So that's what I was saying before. When BA.2 hits 50% of the overall COVID cases, that's when it flexes its power. It shows its severity. So has COVID been, as far as we hope that the skies stay sunny, has BA.2 been increasing week after week for like 6 weeks in a row? Yes. So do you have any specific reason to think that it will suddenly stop? No. No, you don't. That's not generally the pattern that we've seen with BA.2. So as far as the statement of the skies are sunny now and we hope that they'll stay that way, you can revise that statement to still even reflect hope, to be something a lot more accurate and actually protective of public health and informative to people in the public who are not tracking this closely, but would like, when they do tune in, they would like some accurate information. You can change it to, we have every reason to believe that there's going to be a major storm in a couple of weeks based on the forecast, though we hope that it's not as bad. However, that's what we're preparing for. That would be, I would not really take issue with that. You know what I'm saying? The problem here is wishful thinking and unfounded hope taking place of policy that could actually save people's lives and prevent massive injuries. Continuing, Althoff said that although the UK may provide a glimpse of the future, there are key differences that will affect how BA.2 plays out in the US. In the UK, 86% of eligible people are fully vaccinated, and 67% are boosted, compared with 69% of those eligible vaccinated, so 17% lower baseline vaccination, and 50% boosted in the US, again, 17% boosted lower. Quote, "What we see happening in the UK is going to be perhaps a better story than what we should be expecting here," Althoff said. That's what I'm saying, is like, forget this, the sky's sunny and we hope it stays that way forever. No. It's, well, conditions are such that if it comes here, it's going to be even worse than what's in the UK. And we have every reason, well, it's already here. We have every reason to think that it will reach that level and we need to take appropriate steps now. No, that's not what you're hearing. You're hearing it from me, a YouTube channel with under 7,000 subscribers, fringe voices in the wilderness, but you're not hearing it. I mean, credit to CNN for covering this, though it's buried way down in an article that, do people actually read these articles all the way down? I mean, this is a long article. So, yeah, I don't know that this message is getting out at all. It's kind of buried in there. Continuing, in the Netherlands, it took about a month for BA.2 to overpower BA.1, she noted. If the same timeline occurs in the US, that will mean that the variant is taking off, just as the immunity generated by winter's Omicron's infections will be waning. So yeah, your protection from your Omicron infection comes down right at the same time that BA.2 is taking off. So you get hit twice in just a few months. This is devastating to, your body is not invincible. I know a lot of people listen to this channel in their 20s, and I'm not scolding you for being young, because everybody, when they're young, just doesn't have a concept yet of how fragile the body is, unless you've had some kind of severe accident or illness, or you were born with something or whatever. Usually you just don't have a firm grasp on your mortality at that age, because your body just literally heals faster than it will after you get to be 30, after you get to be 40, after you get to be 50, etc. It's just you got about a 30-year warranty on the standard human body, and after that, you just get aches and pains that just sort of never go away. Your body just doesn't heal as fast. Kids get a scrape, a scratch, it's gone pretty soon afterwards. That's just not the case later on. The body just can't cope with repeated massive injury from a virus. My expectation is that not only is this going to continue to disable people in the short and medium term, but probably will contribute to reduced lifespan as well. Because it attacks your core organs like your heart, your liver, your lungs, your kidneys that are just constantly in use. Quote, I'm concerned about that, Althoff said, but we were in a similar situation last spring where we really got hopeful that things were going to settle down, and we got a little bit of a summer and then we got walloped by Delta, unquote. Absolutely correct. It will be important for people to understand that they may be able to take their masks off for a few weeks. Comment, why bother? Althoff said, but they might also need to go back to wearing them regularly if, I would say when, cases arise. Quote, we could see another wave of illness at our hospitals, she said. Althoff will also be closely watching wastewater data over the next few weeks. Quote, wastewater surveillance is an incredible advancement in how we can monitor SARS coronavirus 2 and what it's doing in the population without needing really any input from people, she said. Comment, really it's more you need output from people, but anyway. Quote, keeping our eye on wastewater surveillance is an important tool to understand where the virus is going and if it's increasing in terms of infection, unquote. Preparing for the next wave. Protection against the next variant has to start with vaccination. I mean, that's important. A lot of people are vaccinated. More could be vaccinated. But actually it needs to start, I would say, with stopping transmission. Quote, we absolutely have to continue to find people who are unvaccinated and get them vaccinated, Althoff said. Now, I would push back on that. It's not like this is some kind, it's like a video game, like find the unvaccinated people. You're on some Easter egg hunt. No, I mean, people who are unvaccinated, it's not like they haven't heard of vaccines. That's not really the issue. I would rephrase that. Fauci agreed that vaccination rates could be better in all age groups, but said that current numbers are especially bad for kids. Data collected by the CDC show about 28% of children aged 5 to 11 are fully vaccinated, while 58% of kids 12 to 17 have had 2 doses of a COVID-19. I'm just stumbling on these. 28% of children in like basically elementary school age, 5 to 11. 28% of children in elementary school only are vaccinated. And then a little over half of high school age children have had 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. And then guess what? Under 5, well, it goes on. Even though the youngest children, those under 5, can't yet be vaccinated. Recent studies have shown young kids are less likely to catch COVID-19 when they're surrounded by vaccinated older children and adults. So there's no source on that one. And there are links throughout this. I am unfamiliar with those studies. I know that that's something that Rochelle Walensky was putting out, head of the CDC. But I think that there are, if that's true at all, I think that that's a manipulated statement in terms of what's the difference of somebody who's vaccinated versus somebody who isn't in terms of the viral load. What I've seen is that for the first week, viral load is identical. After that, viral load drops in people who are vaccinated much more quickly, so that by the time you get to week 3, the viral load in a vaccinated person is like way, way, way lower than somebody who's unvaccinated, because your immune system was primed to respond, so it's responding more efficiently and gets the job done more rapidly. But I don't know if that's actually the case in the first week of an infection. And anyway, I think this is skimming over a lot of important, relevant information. Quote, so the way you protect them is to surround the children to the extent possible with people who are vaccinated and boosted so that you have somewhat a veil of protection around them, Fauci said. No, veil of protection is wrong. You don't get like osmotic protection by being around vaccinated people, okay? That's not how this works at all. Standing next to a vaccinated person does not give you a veil of protection. That is, I mean, just borderline disinformation. And notice that the topic that they haven't touched is making people put the fucking masks back on. That's the key here. That's actually a veil of protection, literally. But they don't want to talk about that. Why? You know, has just everything been completely captured by this, like, it's a face diaper dialogue? It's a pandemic. Wear a fucking mask, and in a while it will be over, okay? We're adults. Deal with it. It will also be important to continue to be flexible, says CNN. Quote, the important thing in this massive experiment where we're dropping all masking and restrictions is we have to stay diligent in terms of monitoring of it and testing and be prepared to possibly reverse a lot of the relaxing of these restrictions, said Deborah Fuller, a microbiologist at the University of Washington. Quote, we can't let our guard down because that's exactly what this is about, though. This isn't an experiment of like, gee, I wonder what happens if we take it off. I genuinely don't know. It's not an experiment like that. They know goddamn well it's going to spread. That's been, I mean, you could predict that in advance, but it's also now been firmly established. This is just capitulation. It's not an experiment. Anyway, we can't let our guard down because the message that people get when we say we're lifting restrictions is the pandemic is over. And it's not, she said. So credit to Deborah Fuller for saying outright that the pandemic isn't over, because it isn't. But I think people got that message with mask or vax back in May, because clearly the entire narrative being put out by the most powerful interests in capitalist society is pandemic over, okay? And that clearly is the message that some people wanted to have, you know, I mean, before pandemic is over, some people are like, pandemic not a thing in the first place. And there's always been that reactionary just resistance towards doing anything. This isn't an experiment, though. So I don't mean to like nitpick her words, but it kind of matters. This isn't an experiment in the sense of like, we genuinely don't know, and it's time to take that qualified risk. There's no kind of like, you know, we're not actually learning anything new. We're taking risk for absolutely no reason. It's just to appease certain powerful interests, and that's what it's about. That's the end of that article. So now we have one more article. This is from CBS News. Again, these were like the first few articles I grabbed on this subject. It's being covered everywhere. It's just not translating into action. Omicron subvariant BA.2 spreading across the U.S. as cases rise overseas. Just as Americans start taking off their masks, I would change that to just as Americans, U.S. Americans, are told to take off their masks by their government, the Omicron subvariant BA.2 is quickly spreading across the United States, making up nearly a quarter of new COVID-19 infections, health officials estimate. BA.2 is about 30% more transmissible than Omicron. Again, I would put that more as 30 to 50%, but at least 30%. But it does not appear to be more severe. Okay. As, you know, we've said, that's probably roughly accurate, although it does seem to have its effects hit more quickly once you get infected. And despite the spread of the new subvariant, U.S. daily cases and hospitalizations continue to drop while deaths plateau. Quote, we've been watching it closely, of course, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters on Monday. We expect some fluctuation, especially at this relatively low level, and certainly for that to increase. Okay, so what are you doing about it? In the UK, meanwhile, cases were up about 52% in the last week, and hospitalizations were up 18%, almost 3 weeks after the country dropped its last remaining COVID-19 mandates. In China, COVID infections are rising fast, with daily cases jumping about 14% in the last few days. China's less effective COVID vaccine and low levels of natural immunity, due in part to severe lockdowns. That's one way to put it. They've also had way lower cases. So, anyway, have complicated the country's efforts to stop the spread of BA.2. Andy Slavitt, former White House senior advisor for the Biden administration, said Americans should not be too concerned. That's incredible. That's amazing. We should not be too concerned by the new subvariant yet. Again, continuing with the houses burning down metaphor, it's like a house 20 houses down from yours on like a block of row houses that are all connected. Oh yeah, you know, you're down at the other end of the fire. Don't be too concerned yet. But yeah, I'm going to be affected by that. Anyway, that is disinformation. Quote, when there are waves again, there was a wave, what, like, it just has been ending recently, like now. It's been, the peak came down in the US for like a week ago. It was like high peaking 2 months ago. This isn't ancient history. I mean, honestly, like the peak was like 2 months ago, and the peak was so high, it still hasn't come all the way down. Like the point where it even came back down to the Delta level, which was already a problem at the time the Delta was, that was like just a few weeks ago. Anyway, when there are waves again. Yeah, it's not even every 6 months now. Way shorter time frame. This is insanity. The best thing you could do for your family is to get vaccinated and get boosted. He forgot to add, crossing your fingers and looking for a four-leaf clover, because that's basically where we're going now. He told CBS News correspondent Nikki Battiste. The second thing I'd say is that when COVID is going around again, it's going around now, it is okay to wear masks, even if they're not required by authorities. Wow. Thank you for your permission. The White House said that cuts to COVID funding in Congress could hit Americans as early as next week. Sweet. Medical providers will no longer be able to submit claims for COVID treatments, tests, or vaccinations for the uninsured, and the U.S. may not have enough funding to purchase additional boosters. Okay, so we're going to leave that article there. Terrifying. To me, that's extremely alarming. Switching to another article, this one from NPR. The White House says it's running out of money to cover COVID tests and vaccines. This is from March 15, Tamara Keith and Kelsey Snell. Next week, the White House says it will start to wind down a COVID-19 program that pays to test, treat, and vaccinate people who don't have health insurance. It's one of several immediate impacts after Congress declined to add $22.5 billion in funding to a broad government spending bill passed last week. President Biden signed the bill into law on Tuesday, hailing it as a bipartisan achievement without mentioning the lack of COVID-19 funding. What a surprise. Also, bipartisan achievements. You're working with Nazis. Okay. The COVID-19 funding request met with political pushback from Republicans and concern among some lawmakers that the White House has not fully explained how trillions in COVID money has been spent so far and what funding remains. The Republicans in particular have been unwilling to agree to new spending. The White House warned in a letter to lawmakers on Tuesday that the country risks being, quote, blindsided by future coronavirus variants. Quote, what we're asking for is a modest investment to not squander the gains we've made over the last year, said Natalie Quillian, Deputy Coordinator for the White House COVID-19 Response Team. Make that the Bain Capital COVID-19 Response Team. We need to remember the dark days and how quickly a variant can come. Anyway, they go on to why Congress left out the funding, but I'm going to skip ahead to the White House will cancel a new order for monoclonal antibodies. The White House said that it will have to cut back shipments of monoclonal antibody treatments to states by 30% next week because of the funding snafu. I don't know if this is a snafu, actually. It seemed very deliberate. And said that the nation's supply of those treatments could run out as soon as May. The Biden administration is canceling plans to buy more of the treatment next week because of the lack of funding. The government also cannot buy more oral antiviral treatments like Paxlovid beyond the 20 million treatments already secured and needs to scale back planned purchases of preventative treatments for immunocompromised people, the White House said. And while officials say that they do have enough vaccine doses available for immunocompromised people to get a fourth dose, if the rest of the population ends up needing an additional dose, they may not have the funds needed to meet the nation's needs. The gap in funding would be particularly severe if a vaccine-evading variant comes along and a new formulation, that is like a new vaccine brew, is needed. The White House also said that it will not be able to provide help to domestic manufacturers of at-home coronavirus tests beyond June, which it said will lead to diminished testing capacity. Commenting, I did a whole article about how test manufacturers were going out of business and dumping their kits because it wasn't profitable to produce, and this is part of the issue with having a for-profit medical system and medical supply chain. These are things that absolutely need to be decommodified. Continuing, research into next generation COVID-19 vaccines will be curbed because, yeah, why improve them? And some surveillance for new variants will also be stopped, the White House said. The administration will also need to limit its push to help poorer countries to vaccinate people. Now, commenting, they've already not been doing nearly enough on that. Intellectual property rights have come ahead of people's health during a pandemic. It's part of why we're entering year 3 of the pandemic with the worst variants by far. And by the way, when people say that Omicron or that BA.2 isn't more severe than Omicron, or that Omicron may be milder than Delta, remember Delta is far more severe than the original COVID, which killed people in huge numbers when it first came out. So yeah, there's vaccines and there's this and that makes it look a little bit less severe, but we're dealing with fundamentally a much more hostile virus now. It might be slightly less severe than the last variant, but that variant is much more severe than what we started with. So yeah, it's like saying, 90 is less than 100. It's also a lot more than 10. Anyway, continuing, Republicans want the White House to account for past COVID aid spending. Republicans want the White House to provide a more detailed accounting of exactly how the government has spent the roughly $6 trillion in COVID-19 funding that Congress has already approved. Lawmakers and staff say that they have not been given any clear accounting of the funds. Earlier this month, Senator Mitt Romney of Utah sent Biden a letter with specific questions, including how much money has been spent on each testing and vaccine program. There's a pandemic going on, okay? I'm sure that accounting exists somewhere. Can we make sure that people continue to not die? Way too many people have been dying. I don't even know how to phrase this. Can we do all that we can now and make sure that the accounting gets done, but maybe total things up? It's a gigantic emergency. For once, it's not a military situation. And yet, anyway, just now is not the time for any of this. So it goes on like this for a while, quote, tracing back and making sure that COVID dollars were spent in a responsible way. This isn't fucking over. So this is just more, anyway, what can I say? I hate the Republican Party. Democrats are just as bad in their own way. Anyway, enough of that. That is basically the mainstream coverage on these topics. Let's take a closer look at what's going on with BA.2. And I'm going to look at a thread from Eric Feigl-Ding, epidemiologist and health economist on Twitter. I like his threads because usually it matches my own thinking, and he's already structured them in a nicely labeled tweet thread. So let's get into that. BA.2 doubles in 1 week. New CDC data show that BA.2 has now roughly doubled to 23.1% from just 11.6% last week. And you can see on the graphic there, this is the week of March 12. This is a horrendous acceleration from just 7% prior. The England surge started when BA.2 hit at roughly half. April increase likely, get boosted. So we're going to continue the thread, but this is what I was saying. When BA.2 gets to half of the overall COVID cases and it's on its way, you can see clearly in that chart, BA.2 comes in 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it's just been steadily increasing. So that last comment from somebody else of like, oh, it seems to be slowing its doubling time. It's steadily doubling. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, when I say 2 or 3 weeks, that's, I think, what we're looking at before we hit the 50% mark. So next tweet, BA.2 is surging at an exponential rate. It's on the screen, but this tweet is from March 15, 2022. Look at the same surge in BA.2 on a logarithmic scale. That's where, so basically you can, people not familiar with graph measures, you can either have a linear scale where it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or a logarithmic scale where it goes up by tens. So 0.1%, 1%, 10%, 100%. Just note that on the left side, the y-axis. So anyway, on a log scale, the green line clearly shows the log linear steep climb. This is definitely an ominous trend. So if you have a log linear steep climb, it basically means that you're growing at an exponential rate. In other words, when you plot the data on a logarithmic chart, it makes a linear curve. That's log linear. On a logarithmic scale, you get a linear output. That means exponential growth. And it is at a steep angle. That's like a 60-degree angle right there that it's climbing at. So you can compare it to the purple and red lines, which are Omicron BA.1, two different versions of BA.1. They had a steeper initial climb because they were competing against Delta, which is less contagious. And you can see that as they reached their peak, Delta comes down sharply, although, look, recently we had another Delta uptick as the BA.2, or sorry, the BA.1 was coming down. Anyway, BA.2 is climbing, and it's, of course, competing for market share with the BA.1 strains. But you can see that the purple BA.1.1.529, that's coming down now. It's still very high, but it's coming down. And but BA.1.1 still up there. Next tweet, last week for March 5th, CDC estimated 11.6%. But for the same week, CDC now admits they grossly underestimated the same week. CDC now revised that up to 13.7%. Hence, CDC has been underestimating BA.2 by a bit. The current 23% number could be low too. So this is what I was saying before. When I was looking at it and it was like tripling at the early stages week to week, they went back and like revised all those numbers because I was like, what's going on? And I realized all the numbers were different. And I was like, all right, this is part of why I haven't done a COVID update in a few weeks, because I wanted to get better data in. Now we have it. So continuing, it's even higher in the New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands region, with an astounding 39% BA.2 already. New England region close behind at 38.6% as well. These make sense. The Northeast is always traditionally seeded from Europe's surge earlier than the rest of the country, just like in 2020. So you can see on the screen there is a current screenshot. This is from March 6 to 12 CDC Nowcast. That's from their COVID tracker, basically. The pink is BA.2, the purple is the BA.1. So here's a screenshot I took several weeks ago. This was from late February, so just about 3 weeks ago. 220 to 226. So look at the pie charts there, then look at them again for last week. Not good stuff. Steady increase. You know that surge in Hong Kong and China? Driven by BA.2. Hong Kong per capita mortality is triple the next highest mortality country right now, and approaching New York City 2020 levels of deaths, sadly. There's a retweet there from February 28. The BA.2 situation in Hong Kong is getting out of hand. Dead bodies are now piling up on gurneys in hospital hallways. Morgues are 90% capacity and refusing COVID patients. Hong Kong built many field hospital isolation beds in 1 week. Drastic measures needed. England's BA.2 spike and dropping mitigations has catapulted it into both a case surge and hospitalization surge starting last week. Incredibly fast increase in both. The data are even worse now. So there's a retweet there from May 9. Bad trend. Cases of COVID-19 soaring across all ages in England. Meanwhile, BA.2 is soaring past 50% across all regions of England. Data is even 2 weeks old. Meanwhile, hospital admissions are soaring across all England regions. Cases are up most among kids. Also, here's how it started in February. Low single digits. So this is kind of what I was just showing you. We didn't act. We just let mitigations go. And Wastewater is now showing signals that the national trend is reversing and a surge is coming soon. So there it is from March 8th, how it started and how it's going. By region in the U.S., compare 1 month ago on February 5th versus now, March 5th, data. See anything wrong with the pink pie charts? BA.2 is growing. I've seen this rodeo 4 times before. New variants displace old ones for a reason. It's not a good sign. Wastewater SARS coronavirus 2 trend is unmistakable, that the tide has turned, and there will be more spikes. So there you have from the US CDC a graphic, more sites reporting more virus. The number of sites with a more than 10% increase has doubled since February. So the black bar, there are three bars, black, gold, and yellow. Black is trending down. That's gone from about 75 to 80%, now down to about 55 to 60%. The flat to little changed is just sort of like a little 5% buffer in the middle. And then trending up, that has more than doubled. It was previously about 25%. Now it's more like 45%. Well, I'd say 40. So that's the trending upwards in the wastewater. It's coming. It's coming. So with the new BA.2 data, it's clear that it has an 80% growth advantage versus BA.1, old Omicron. An uptick in cases comes sooner by even late March if this pace increases, but hopefully no earlier. But definitely by early to mid-April at this pace. So I'm saying now 2 to 3 weeks, that is early April. That would be my guess. So there's a retweet there from Jay Weiland at JP Weiland on Twitter, March 15. New CDC data, still tracking BA.2 model projections, 23% of cases for the week 312, 35 to 40% week-to-week absolute BA.2 increase, 80% week-to-week advantage over BA.1. Hopefully spring weather will stunt this before it takes off too far. I don't think so personally. Meanwhile, the US government has officially run out of pandemic emergency funds. We barely have enough for bare minimum things now. And those amazing wonder treatments, we barely have a quarter of what we ordered. This is referring to testing, treating, and vaccinating the uninsured, monoclonal antibody drugs cut 30%, and Paxlovid, now only 20 million available. So that's Congress. Also remember, BA.2 has 25 to 30% higher secondary attack rate than old Omicron BA.1 for second-degree infections in a cluster. So what is that? The secondary attack rates is infection in secondary household members and in workplaces. It's much higher with BA.2 than with other variants. 14.3% is quite high, and about 25% higher than BA.1's 11.4%. So basically, it will cross-infect more people. There's an infographic to that effect. Just stare at this graph on infection attack rates of BA.2 in red versus old BA.1, blue, it's the middle line, or Delta, purple, much lower. The new BA.2 absolutely deserves its own Greek letter variant of concern, but World Health Organization so far is refusing to reclassify it as a new variant of concern. It's time. The next wave already started in Europe, and you can clearly see on that graph, they're just going right up there. BA.2 is worse than BA.1 already in many EU countries. We see Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Portugal, France, UK, and Belgium all trending up, and that's in decreasing order, Austria and Switzerland being the most pronounced. Removing protections will cause deaths, sickness, disabilities of many more people. And no, not only, quote, vulnerable are at risk. Anyone who says BA.2 won't cause a surge are in delusion. So there's, at Dr. Eric Ding's thread on the subject, I still have a couple of articles that I want to get into here. Really, I've been covering COVID basically since the start, and it honestly blows me away what the U.S. government, I mean, I'm in the U.S., so I watch the U.S. government the most closely. They have been awful at pretty much every turn. Whether it was, the foot dragging on paying people, and then the sort of stingy system of, doing the benefits through the unemployment system, and then cutting the benefits after just a few months so that people were getting like $175 to $200 a week only. People have like $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 mortgages because that's what houses cost now. I mean, for that, and rents are even higher in some cases. Yet they're giving people like $200 a week, and that was from like 5 months. That was like August, September, October, November, and December in 2020. It's just been kind of one thing after another, where it's just keeping people in like an extremely precarious situation. So I was going to turn to another article. I do have two other articles I'd like to cover, but actually I have another Feigelding thread that I think it makes sense to hit first. This is from 3 weeks ago, February 26th. I was starting to get into this stuff. The Russia-Ukraine situation broke out. That took a lot of energy. I also got sick with something a couple of weeks ago. I was out for like a week. So anyway, I'm just sort of getting my bearings again now. Let's do part two of this, and I'll throw in, I have an article from The Atlantic and another one from MedPage that are relevant really more to this. So let's lay out the early framework first. So what happened 3 weeks ago, February 25? The CDC basically rolled out new standards for COVID. It was like, oh, the Omicron wave has, come down. Let's pretend that the pandemic is over even more. Even though we just got a wave that was like 3.5 times as bad as anything that had come before it, the pandemic is officially over now because we say so. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, so Feigelding, February 26, had to say, the CDC director needs to go. CDC says anyone with this short list of 24 plus risk factors can basically go screw themselves. Quote, if you have one of these conditions, talk with your healthcare provider about how best to protect yourself from severe COVID-19. In other words, basically, you're on your own. So tweets here from Lisa Diedrich at L. Diedrich. Cancer, this is the list of pre-existing conditions which may increase your chances of being hospitalized, this is per the CDC, needing intensive care, requiring a ventilator to help you breathe, or you might die. Okay, so what's on this list? Cancer, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, chronic lung diseases, cystic fibrosis, dementia and other neurological conditions, diabetes, type 1 or type 2, disabilities, that's pretty vague, heart conditions, HIV infection, immunocompromised state or weakened immune system of any kind, mental health conditions, okay, that's a big one, overweight and obesity. So does anybody out there know the prevalence of conditions of overweight and obesity in the United States? It's about 75%. So basically the standard for being overweight is having a body mass index of 25 and up, and obesity is 30 and up. So for obesity, it's about 42% of adults over 20 in the US are obese, and lowering the bar to just the overweight standards, that number shoots up to like 73 point something percent. So it's true that BMI has like certain flaws, but generally speaking, if you're not a bodybuilder and like there's a few other things, I mean, it's a reasonable, estimate. That's 3/4 of the population. So by those standards, 3/4 of the population on that measure alone are at increased risk of hospitalization, needing intensive care, requiring a ventilator, or dying if they get COVID. So factor in mental health conditions. I mean, things like depression and anxiety, you're talking about 10 to 15% of the population. Sure, some of that's going to overlap with being overweight and obese, but let's say it adds another 5%. So we're up to like 80% of the population is at heightened risk. Physical inactivity, pregnancy, sickle cell or thalassemia, smoking, current or former, solid organ or blood stem cell transplant, stroke or cerebrovascular disease, substance abuse disorders, and tuberculosis. So yeah, basically anybody with weakened immune system, kidney, lung, heart, liver, and then a variety of other things, you're at, your system is already weaker and you're at increased risk of severe outcomes from COVID. Yeah, so the CDC is basically just like, talk to your doctor. So, when I say that we're on our own, that's definitely concerning. Now let's talk about the CDC, as Feigelding says, moving the goalpost of mitigation and risk levels. It's pretty sickening, to be honest. This is supposed to be a science agency. So what I've been saying all along, the Democrats have their own version of climate denial. They also have their own version of COVID denial. It's not the same as the Republicans, but it's their own version of it. It's also COVID denial. It's also denial of what needs to be done. They just have their own flavor of it. And in emergency situations like this, even that kind of denial is also catastrophic. So there's a retweet there of @HoneyRosie. They moved the goalposts by changing the metric of what it means to have a high number of cases. Now it almost only pertains to hospitalizations, not actual cases. Dishonesty will lead to more deaths. There's a screenshot of a USA Today article. Under the old guidelines, masks were recommended for people living in communities of substantial or high transmission. So if you remember like this chart where high was red and low was blue and then yellow and orange are in the middle, it was if you were in substantial or high, wear a mask. The new guidance will consider hospitalizations, current beds occupied by COVID patients, and hospital capacity. In addition to caseloads, the metrics would put more than half of U.S. counties, where more than 70% of the U.S. population lives, in areas of low or medium risk. So this is another step beyond, like what they already were doing in 2021 when the vaccines came out, was if you're vaccinated, they're not going to count your case unless you're hospitalized. Now, this is yet another step away from just counting the cases. It's just a step towards basically, moving the goalpost until nothing qualifies. And then, hey, the pandemic's over. Basically because we changed the standards where we don't count anything anymore. So here's another tweet to that effect. On the left there, at the bottom, that's the old graphic. And then on the right is the new graphic, the green, yellow, red. Note that the new green, yellow, red is just sort of a crazy checkerboard of colors. It's all over the place. Previously, it's mostly red with some orange mixed in and then some pockets of blue where I can only assume nobody lives, like it's in Montana and places like that. I can assume nobody lives or they're not really doing cases because we don't believe in that sort of thing. Kind of more backward places. Okay. Now, a lot of places that were red are considered green. Why? Because they can afford to give you a hospital bed? That doesn't mean that you can just go get COVID. But that's sort of what this implies. So as Feigl Ding says, CDC guidelines for high levels of community transmission risk is currently all over the place. One site is almost all red, and the other majority mixed with low and medium. No wonder people are confused as hell. So yeah, I should underline, these are both CDC standards, and they're using them both still. They're kind of just contradicting themselves. It blows the mind. I mean, it's baffling. So, as Feigl Ding said, magic, we go from left map to right map in just one day. Hallelujah. One day, COVID will just disappear. Never thought the CDC would gaslight us like this. CDC director, what are you doing? COVID is not over. And he recommends, at Kativa PMD, ex-Obama health policy director, recommends following her instead. I'm not familiar with her, really, so I can't recommend that. But I agree with the overall point that the CDC just moved the goalposts to where it's meaningless. So here's that example I was talking about. Sick of CDC director gaslighting people about COVID. You can't both tell people that COVID is, quote, substantial risk in your area, but then say it's low enough risk to go without masks. Seriously, CDC staffers, doesn't anyone in the agency have the guts to speak out? It's what I keep asking on Twitter. When does the medical and public health revolt against this stuff start? Again, Biden's not going to fucking hire you. Speak the truth here. It's an emergency. So retweeting Diana Zicklin Barrett. Okay, so let me get this straight. 2 days ago, CDC said my county had substantial transmission and warned against being indoors unmasked. And today, CDC director dropped all mask mandates. Just wanted to make sure I got that straight. So these tweets are from 3 weeks ago, February 25, February 26, when these new guidelines were rolled out. What we've seen over the last 3 weeks is steady increase of BA.2. It's on its way to 50%, just a matter of time. Again, I would say another 2 or 3 weeks before it's over 50%, and that is where the wheels start to really come off. Could this be slowed down? Could it even be stopped by not removing these mitigation measures? Possibly, yes, but they're not trying. So Feigelding gives a good list here. As a reminder, these are the cardinal red flags to look out for when assessing whether a public health or medical official is level-headed or not. 1, coronavirus isn't airborne, if anybody's saying that. It is airborne. Yes, droplet transmission can occur, but also it stays suspended in the air as an aerosol. It is airborne. Just stay 6 feet away. Plexiglass is fine. Basically, again, the 6 feet away, that's for like droplet transmission and stuff like that. But it hangs in the air, so 6 feet isn't really gonna do that much. Plexiglass, again, protects against spittle droplets, but not against aerosol particles. You know, at one point, we didn't know about the aerosol transmission. Now we do. And if we do, the CDC does. And, you know, any other medical public health official whose job it is to know this, they know it, but again, you know, they don't want to alarm the public or whatever this is, or it's intent to actively harm the public. We don't really know, but it is harmful. We know that. Other red flags, don't worry about variants. This whole like variants get progressively weaker over time. I mean, I think the average person on the street knows that every successive variant has been worse at this point. You know, I don't even know what to say about that. We just had the worst spike by far within the past 2 months. So there's no excuse for thinking that. That you can't get reinfected? No, as we've covered, both the vaccine and the natural immunity, they both wane in a matter of months. So there is, you just have to stop transmission. There's the risk of not getting infected again is just, well, I mean, you can even get reinfected, just how severe it will be. It only lasts a few months. So no need to mask indoors. Absolutely insane. Again, it's spread in an airborne manner, so yes, you need to mask indoors, absolutely. If you're around anybody that isn't wearing a mask, you need to be wearing a mask. N95 or KN95. I personally prefer the N95s. I think generally you get a better seal. But yeah, and even then it can get in your eyes, but at least wearing the N95, you're not, you know, vacuum sucking it into your mouth all the time. Learn to live with the virus. No disease has been stopped in this way. You know, you often see the example going around like when there were cholera outbreaks, they treated the water. They didn't just tell people like keep, you know, drinking sewage contaminated water. And kids are practically immune. So actually, off of that, let's do one of the 2 articles that I want to read here. This is from MedPage Today, and the title is No Underlying Conditions in 63% of Young Kids Hospitalized During Omicron. Hospitalizations in infants, toddlers, increased 5-fold in the Omicron wave versus the Delta wave. So this is from Lili Wu, staff writer, MedPage Today, March 15. During the peak of the Omicron wave, weekly hospitalizations for infants and toddlers due to COVID-19 were approximately 5 times what they were during the peak of the Delta variant, new research from the CDC showed. In the first week of January, COVID-associated hospitalizations in children ages 0 to 4 years reached 14.5 per 100,000 children, reported Kristen Marks, PhD, and the COVIDnet surveillance team in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Quick side note, morbidity is sickness, mortality is death. Of those hospitalized during Omicron's predominance, so that was when Omicron was the dominant variant, 63% had no underlying medical conditions. Let me read that again. Of those hospitalized during Omicron's predominance, 63% had no underlying medical conditions. Infants younger than 6 months of age were hospitalized at 6 times the rate that they were during the Delta variant's predominance. Rate ratio 6.1, 95% confidence interval, 3.9 to 10. During the 2 waves, hospitalizations in kids under 6 months of age accounted for 43% to 44% of all hospitalizations among children ages 0 to 4 years, according to the report. So again, during the 2 waves, Delta and Omicron, hospitalizations in kids under 6 months of age, infants, accounted for nearly half, 43 to 44%, of all hospitalizations of kids 4 and under. So you could say that infants are especially prone to getting this because they are just 1/8 of that overall age group. All right, if you got 4 years, divide it in half, divide it into 6-month chunks, the kids in the first 6 months were almost half of the overall group, way overrepresented. Quote, although infants aged less than 6 months are not currently eligible for vaccination, evidence suggests that this age group can receive protection through passive transplacental transfer of maternal antibodies acquired through vaccination, Marks and colleagues wrote. CDC recommends that women who are pregnant, breastfeeding, trying to become pregnant, or might become pregnant get vaccinated and stay up to date with COVID-19 vaccination, they added. Marks's group also recommended that family members and caregivers get vaccinated. So the family members and caregivers is one thing. Again, I think so you're not carrying around really high levels of viral load as you go later into the infection. Although, again, I think that this really needs to be tempered with it may be of somewhat limited use. However, as they say here, there's some evidence that women can pass along the antibodies across the placenta to the growing baby that is, yet to be born. So that's good, okay? That the baby can be born with some amount of immunity to COVID, although, how strong it is, I don't know. Continuing, this study supports previous reports showing that hospitalizations for young children surged during Omicron. Currently, only children ages 5 and older are eligible for a COVID vaccine, and only those 12 and older are eligible for a booster shot. Comment, we heard many times how important the booster shot is for dealing with Omicron, so kids not eligible for that at this point. Monthly intensive care unit, or ICU, admission rates were around 3.5 times higher during the Omicron peak compared with the Delta peak, though a higher proportion of infants hospitalized during Delta predominance required ICU admission. So, in other words, the proportion of infants during Delta was higher, 27% versus 21%. That's very statistically significant. P equals 0.02. However, it's a small absolute increase, 6%, a reasonable relative increase. It's 28% higher than the previous number. Still, it didn't skyrocket, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's still bad, but anyway, continuing. Hospital length of stay during Omicron predominance was also shorter than during Delta, 2 versus 1.5 days. Very high degree of statistical significance, 0.0002 on the P number. So there could be different factors for that, like hospital policy of how long they keep people could have changed. I'm not sure if they covered that in the study or not. Continuing, hospitalization rates for children ages 0 to 4 years began to fall in mid-February, they said 1 month ago. Notably, over 1,500 children, about 62% of the study cohort, who were tested for additional pathogens. 1/5 were hospitalized with respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, co-detections during Delta predominance compared with only 7% during Omicron predominance. This pattern supports trends in RSV circulation seen in other studies, the researchers noted, as it increased during the summer and fall of 2021 and decreased in the winter. Quote, these limited data suggest that the surge in hospitalizations during Omicron predominance was not driven by co-infections, Marks and colleagues wrote. Young infants were more likely to have been hospitalized with RSV co-detections compared with younger children, with 13% of those younger than 6 months hospitalized, compared with 4% of children ages 6 to 23 months, and 2% of children aged 2 to 4 years, so that goes steadily down. However, length of stay, ICU admission, and use of respiratory support did not differ significantly by age, Marks and colleagues reported. Quote, future studies are needed to understand the possible long-term consequences of COVID-19 infection among infants, they wrote. I'll just throw out there, we know that one child-specific long COVID effect seems to be a marked increase in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. That is terrible. Those diseases are already very large problems in the US. Having them increase due to COVID, due to like direct damage to the pancreas from the virus, absolutely not a situation you want. This study was part of COVIDnet, which conducts surveillance studies in hospitals across 14 states. It included data on over 2,500 children aged 0 to 4 years who were hospitalized from March 2020 to mid-February 2020. Of these children, 85% had COVID-19 as the primary reason for admission. So this whole COVID with thing, please just stop. The study period was divided into 3 periods, depending on which variant accounted for over half of sequenced isolates. March 2020 to June 26, 2021 was considered the pre-Delta predominance period. June 27 to December 18, 2021 was the Delta predominance period, and December 19, 2021 to January 31, 2022 was the Omicron predominance period. Marks and colleagues noted that their study could not account for differences in testing practices or public health policies that could have influenced COVID spread. So that's the end of the article. Brief aside about the impact on children of all this. Again, having a, quote, pre-existing condition does not really seem, 63% of children didn't have them, and there you go. There's the article. So I think that I'm going to leave the second article for a separate video in a few days. However, just to wrap this video up, going back to the Feigl-Ding thread, here is a comparison of the new versus the old CDC standards. So before and after, CDC director, what say you? I'm ready to start a hey, hey, ho, ho chant. And credit to Feigl-Ding, he's been calling for the removal of Rochelle Walensky from her position. This is, the thing is, I don't think that this is coming from her, because we see it at every level of the US government, basically, and in other countries as well that follow similar, free market type of policies. So I think that the problem's a lot bigger than Rochelle Walensky, and whoever the people that these policies are coming from are going to replace her with is also going to reflect those policies which stem from a deeper level. That said, these are demands that people can make. We need to focus it on the policies. But also, yes, get the people out for sure. There's a retweet here from WSB-GNL. Previous and new CDC COVID transmission thresholds based on cases per 100,000 population per week. This is per the CDC levels. Previously, what used to be red, yellow, orange, and blue on this entire chart, now, according to the new standards, are all green. It's all good. They're all low. So here's another tweet from WSB-GNL on Twitter, February 27. U.S. COVID cases compared with previous and new CDC COVID transmission thresholds. You can kind of see the breakdown here of the old standards. Those are the 3 stripes at the bottom: low, moderate, and substantial, blue, yellow, orange, or red. It looks kind of orangey on this chart. So previously, a lot of the pandemic was in the substantial area. According to the new standards, look at how much higher that is. So remember this chart. When we say moving the goalposts, the CDC has moved the goalposts on what counts as severe COVID risk. This is what we're talking about. So there we are. Get prepared, because if BA.2 keeps climbing at the current rate, there's no specific reason to think that it won't, then we're probably in for another wave in early, mid to late April. And I don't know what to say at this point. The CDC clearly is just backing off on even calling a lot of this a problem. If you want any change in these policies, you're going to have to, with your orgs, make statements, do protests, put out press releases, stage events and actions that call attention to this, make demands. Honestly, there needs to be more resistance to this, especially that we're moving into a thing where they're cutting the funding for people to even get tested, boosted, all that kind of stuff. Or, let alone if you get it and you need monoclonal antibodies, the supply of that is now going to be 30% lower. It's like they're just packing the whole thing up slowly but surely. Biden is, still fixated on this back to normal thing. Well, what about any of this feels normal? Aside from the U.S. is constantly a disaster, but this is not normal in the least. And having massive spikes of these hyper contagious Omicron type variants, every few months. This is way worse than the pandemic has been up to this point. So, anyway, do what you can. Get boosted now. Absolutely get boosted now. Um, and if you haven't been already, but to me, this is just. I was covering this a lot during the Omicron wave, and like I said, I have backed off for a few weeks. I was partly just waiting to see the new pattern emerging because as it came down, and mission accomplished and victory was being declared everywhere, and then the war started in Ukraine, it's like there was just a lot of chaos and clutter going on. It's pretty clear that the BA.2 wave is going to become a severe problem again that people need to get concerned about. And like I said, get in your orgs, get active, make demands. We have to make noise on this issue. This literally affects everyone. Anyway, on that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for listening. It's a very long update. It's about an hour and 50 minutes. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so I thank you very much for those. Otherwise, just liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting on the channel, even if it's just thanks or good video. All of that engagement helps to drive the channel forward, helps YouTube to show it to more people, helps to expand the audience and widen the conversation about ending capitalism and forming a movement to build socialism. On that note, join an organization. I would suggest something preferably larger rather than smaller, with real ties to the community, doing real work that you'd like to be a part of. An organization that's healthy, that its members reasonably get along with each other, that it's not like a ton of like bitter infighting and burnout and people making wild accusations and getting angry and stuff like that. You want to stay away from that. Getting involved with a bad org can be kind of a life-shattering experience. So also healthy in the sense that it responds actively, in sort of a prompt way to people who make inquiries with it. If you reply and don't hear back for 3 weeks, that org may be inactive or dysfunctional or just not trying, and you might want to keep looking around. You can be usually in more than one org at a time, so you might pick the big mass org that's doing lots of work for membership, to do that kind of work, and you can always be a member of something smaller if it's something that really speaks to you on some level. As far as book clubs and things, you can do that online. We need mass action, mass movement, and strong ties to the community in our orgs, so get involved with what you can around that. Thanks again for listening. I will post that second article that I didn't read in this very long update in a few days, so keep an eye out for that, as well as other audiobooks and commentary, and we'll catch you in the next video.